I'm John Churchill. I'm the chef at 1830 Restaurant and Port Arthur Historic Site. This is our fourth Meet the Maker event that we've had here. It's a really good series where we get to showcase some local talent and some local producers, suppliers, and all the amazing things that they have down here in the peninsula. And this week is whiskey with McHenry Distillery and Brewery. So we've curated a menu that's going to be complementary to their whiskies and their gins and their spirits.
Whisky distilling is a 24-hour-a-day job, and we're a family business, so I'm invested and our family's invested in it. So, William McHenry is my name. Most people won't recognise me even if they'd seen me before because I'm wearing a suit, and that's a bit unusual, isn't it? 20 years ago I came to Port Arthur. Just immediately prior to coming to visit Tasmania, I was with my neighbour having a conversation about career paths and having come out of a corporate career, I was a little bit frustrated with life, and he gave me the sage advice that with a name like William McHenry, I had the right DNA, he said with a name like William McHenry, I should learn the bagpipes and make whiskey, and I fell in love with that idea. And I describe it like next time you walk down the pavement, or sort of walking down a path, concrete path or a bitumen pavement, you'll see a little crack and there'll be a little plant in there. So a seed has wedged in that crack, and despite the conditions which are not conducive for plant growth, it germinates, it starts to grow, it puts out leaves, and if you're looking at the right time of year, it will be flowering. And for me, that idea of starting a family distillery was exactly like that. It was an idea that I just could not shake from my brain, and thankfully my wife could see the passion I had for it and was happy to join me, and we moved from Sydney to Tasmania. So for me, Tasmania was the best place to make whiskey. It has the right conditions, it has everything which essentially replicates Scotland in the north. So ultimately I saw Tasmania as being a key to our success. And you see that now with all the distilleries that are popping up and winning awards. Sullivan's Cove is probably the most prominent one. They've won several world's best whiskies. A new distillery, Greenbanks, won the best rye whiskey in the world. We took out gold in the World Whisky Awards this year. So Tasmania is really sort of forming itself as a sort of crucible of whiskey making. So literally 20 years ago, we were driving around and we came to Port Arthur on one of those absolutely stunning autumn days. Blue sky, green grass, little puffy white clouds, and I visited the historic site, and I honestly fell in love with this part of the world. And then made it my task to find reasons to come here. And I'll share those reasons with you later, so I won't delay anything. The concept was whiskey. Big problem with the whiskey plan is that it takes, to make good whiskey, it takes 10 years. So you've got to be patient. And we do everything in large barrels. We've got a few small barrels here, but we do everything in large format, so we didn't want to rush the process. If there's a car of 4 people, you'd always have 3 people that came here for the whiskey, but one wasn't a whiskey drinker. And the question was always, what else have you got? And so we started making gin. So I really want to frame it that way, because you'll hear a lot of people say, well, gin is one of these things that's great for distilleries because it's so quick to make. That's true. But we didn't do it for that reason. We did it because we wanted to delight customers that came and visited. So the first gin we made was a classic gin, was modelled effectively on a Bombay Sapphire. I went into Salamanca and I went through all the bars there trying to sell my gin. This is back in 2011. And they all said to me, we don't need any more gin, Bill. We've got 4. We've got Bombay Sapphire, we've got Gordon's, we've got Tanqueray, and if we need something good, we've got Hendrick's. Now you fast forward now and there's 1,000 distilleries in Australia, all making about 5 or 6 other gins, so there's now just thousands of gins around. So we have spoilt for choice now in gins, good Australian gins. So the Classic was the first one. We then were approached to make a gin for Parliament House in Canberra, so we started making what we call our Federation Gin, which celebrates Australian botanicals. Looking for other styles of gins, we started to actually go out and forage for some of the botanicals. And the slow gin is a classic English style gin. And we're lucky because we have that English heritage in the last couple of hundred years. And the slow berries and the bush they grow in, it's called the blackthorn, was brought here to Australia pre-industrial age when the fences were either stone walls or basically blackthorn hedges. And on the blackthorn hedges grow the slow berries. So we go out and forage for all of those. It's not a commercial crop, so it means we have to pick every single berry from bushes, from friendly farmers, from creek lines and so forth. One of the other gins we make is a damson gin. It's very similar to the slow gin. They're both plums. Slows and damsons are both plums. And I've actually bought a few here tonight for you to sample. So I'm competing with John here, and so these are ones we actually picked 2 weeks ago. So you can either look at them or have a little taste if you want. They are very ripe, okay? So, but we're going to turn them into, that's a damson plum. So if you can imagine, that's a damson plum. Slows are literally the size of your fingernail, little fingernail. And so they're steeped for at least 18 months. Oh, they've got a seed in them. Don't crunch down on them too hard. They actually have a seed. They're plums. Yeah, Bill. Yep. So, yeah, we're using basically prunus species. So plums, apricots. It's a introduced plant. So, so it takes us about 18 months to make that. So not all gins are quick to make. They're not distilled one day, bottled the next. Some of these actually take a couple of years to make. But we enjoy in going out and foraging ourselves and collecting some of these botanicals. No, in fact, I don't know how many places I've lived in. I feel like a military veteran. You know how they're always moving around from house to house to house. I grew up in Adelaide. And then I went around the world backpacking and sort of lived all over the world. Then I came back and lived in Sydney, and then I went back to New York, and then I came back to Sydney, and then I was looking for a place in Perth, and eventually found my way down here. So I've moved around a lot. The thing when I was growing up in Adelaide, we would jump in after a day of playing, and we would jump into the bath, and even though we were filthy, we would get out dirtier than when we got in, because the Adelaide water was always brown. I don't know if you've ever been to Adelaide and drunk Adelaide water. It is literally the worst water in the world. So I have a sort of a lasting memory of growing up with really bad water. Mum, to my early life growing up, and fundamentally water is vital to whiskey making. So in 2006, when I had this dream of starting a distillery, Sydney was going through a drought. It's hard to imagine, but the Warragamba Dam was down to something like 21%. They said Sydney had like a month left of water, and they started building the desal plant. And now every single capital city, except for Hobart, has a desal plant. We leave the tap running while we're sort of brushing our teeth. We take water for granted, but I never have. And like I said, it's central to making whiskey. To make whiskey, essentially it's a simple spirit. It has 3 ingredients. It has barley, it has yeast, and it has water. So we take that barley and we brew the barley with the yeast in the water to make beer. And you can see we've got our beers here tonight. We take that beer and we distill it down to a fraction of its volume, but intensely flavourful and alcoholic to the whiskey. And even then, 1 part water, 2 parts spirit alcohol. And then when it comes out of the barrel, we temper it down to about, say, in our case, 46%. So 1 part water, 1 part whiskey. to make that whiskey in the bottle. So water is vital. And so when I was looking for a place, I wanted water security. I wanted high quality water that was abundant and never gave up. And we found this gorgeous little spot in a most inconvenient place on the back of Mount Arthur. We have 5 natural springs. We set our distillery up there because of the springs and the water. Now, a lot of distilleries around Australia, they set themselves up, near a car park so they can have lots of visitors. We set ourselves up near a national park because we wanted the conditions which were going to be ideal for making whiskey. And what makes that whiskey actually very special is the rock. And we drive past it all the time, and if you go on your boat, you go out all the sea cliffs here, it's dolerite. So that's it there. This stuff is 200 million years old. It's one of the hardest rocks in the world. It's like basalt. It's an igneous rock. It came out of the ground when in the Jurassic period, when Tasmania was sort of moving over a thin spot in the Earth's crust, and it's pushed itself up around all the sandstone that was originally here. And it's this rock that becomes an aquifer for all the water that falls from the sky. So over this side of the peninsula, we have a rainfall of 1,300 millimetres a year, and that rain percolates down through the ground, through the cracks and all the fissures and the gaps in the rock, and sits there, and it works its way out through the sandstone layer and basically delivers itself to us behind the distillery. In that journey, it might be 1,000 years old, it might be 100 years old, I have no idea. But it's pure, clean water with just small amounts of minerals which are vital for actually brewing. So when I talked about the brewing, we actually use live yeast. The yeast is like us, it needs micro minerals to be able to ferment and grow. And so those micro minerals are what we get from the dolerite. There are places around the world that are known for their water, and we've got it here. And in fact, Chris, who's got the camera here and he's got that focused on me now, he saw how special this place was, and he's actually shifted the way I talk about things now. So for a long time, I used to talk about the water, but every single distillery in Tasmania talks about the water. Despite the fact they might be on town water or taking their water out of a river, they talk about the purity of the Tasmanian water. But what is special and what is unique to us is actually the rock that water sits in. And so Chris he's called it Whisky Rock. And I think he's right, he's absolutely right. Actually, Chris, can I get you to put the camera down for a minute? And he just said, look, I'm a whiskey nerd. Well, no, not a whiskey nerd. You're an ex-advertising executive from Texas.
Yeah.
Okay, you correct everything I say, yeah. But from Texas.
You're good so far.
But basically travels the world, immersing himself with distillers at distilleries, learning about it and writing about it. And so he has a little website and podcast called Still Life Journeys.
Yeah, Still Life Stories.
Stories. And so we connected. And he said he was coming to Australia, and would he like to visit? And I said, yeah. So Chris has actually been here for a month. And so he's really got to know people here. We've got friends amongst the audience. He's been here only a month, but he knows half of everyone sitting here.
And I don't want to leave. I really love it.
So I'll let you take over.
All right.
All right?
I'll be quick because you just got
the microphone, so you have to repeat
Okay.
all of that again.
Yeah, I know what I talk about. So I started going off, and I spent a couple of months in Germany. A couple of months in Scotland at distilleries, a month in Germany, and I'm right in the middle of 3 months in Australia. And I'll go back to Austin for a month, and then I'm going to Wales, Scotland, Norway, and Croatia. So basically, I'm just going to spend the rest of my life running around the planet, spending 2 weeks or a month at a time at distilleries and finding great stuff. And I don't want to do it at giant distilleries because who cares? You know, Jim Beam doesn't need a new story. They don't need anybody to come along and say they're doing anything special, because they're not. But you know, there are so many great places like this, and honestly, you know, what I discovered here, we were, you know, he picked me up at the airport in Hobart, and we're coming back, and we're driving up this long, windy dirt road to get to the distillery, and he says, "Oh, you know, a lot of people complain when they're coming up here because we're really inconvenient." And I thought, that's the first headline. The first headline for the first article I wrote was "The Inconvenient Distillery," because you know, he built a distillery where he did for the right reasons. And this rock, as we discovered, because you know, the water, I'm living on the distillery in a little cabin at the top of the hill, and it's the best water I've ever had in my life. It is just, and it comes right out of the hill. It comes right out of the mountain, and it's because it filters through this stuff. So I'm going to pass this rock around and try not to kill anybody with it, but.
Why you said it to me?
Yeah, so, and we're going to have a contest tonight to name that particular rock, because that's going to be the rock that'll be in the cellar door, and whoever's working there is going to explain why this is such great whiskey and such great water. It's because of that rock. So, you know, I got here, and all these, my job is to find magic wherever I go, in distilleries, whatever client it is, and there's the best magic here that I've seen anywhere. So you guys are really lucky to be living here where you are, next to such a great distillery that's making such great stuff. So that's all I got to say. Eat.